Iran's recently elected president has offered to oversee talks between the Syrian government and the opposition. Hassan Rouhani addressed the Western world in an editorial for the Washington Post, calling on countries to focus on the future and not past frosty relations. The apparent readiness of Iran's new leader to engage has given hope for a thaw in relations with Washington, but that's not an easy goal to achieve. And let's now take a look at the tensions between the two in the past decades or so. A year after the CIA accused Iran of having one of the world's most active nuclear programs, then President George W. Bush named Iran in his infamous axis of evil, causing outrage in Tehran. In 2005 came the first of several statements in which Bush hinted at the possibility of using force. 3 years later, President Bush described Iran as the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, saying action was needed before it's too late. In 2010, the US and Israel stepped up cyber war efforts aimed at disrupting one of Iran's main nuclear power plants. In summer 2012, the US imposed some of its most crippling sanctions, banning world banks from completing oil transactions with Tehran. A few countries were exempt in return for an agreement to cut oil imports from Iran. And just this September, President Obama hinted that pulling back on a strike against Syria doesn't mean he would do the same when it comes to Iran. And in light of Iran's current apparent change of tone, RT's Anissa Nawad takes a look at how responsible America is likely to be.
The U.S. and Iran haven't had diplomatic relations for over 30 years, but recently both sides have suggested that steps could be taken to change that. Next week, the new Iranian president will visit the UN General Assembly, and the Obama administration is preparing for high-level talks between Iranian and U.S. officials, possibly even a direct exchange. So could this be the beginning of a thaw after 3 decades of failed foreign policy towards Iran? Well, joining me now to speak more about that is Hilary Mann Leverett and Flint Leverett, co-authors of Going to Tehran, Why the United States Must Come to Terms with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Hassan Rouhani, who's seen as much more open to work with the U.S. He has a softer line on Israel. He has come out and said that Iran is not going to seek nuclear weapons. Is that enough to change U.S. policy towards Iran?
The Obama administration is very fortunate in terms of the incoming, the new Iranian administration. Both President Rouhani and his foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, have a lot of experience dealing with the West, dealing with international law. They both have PhDs in international law. We worked very closely. I personally, while I was working for the State Department, negotiated with Iranian officials, including the foreign minister Zarif, over Afghanistan to overthrow the Taliban, set up a new government there. The problem really is on the U.S. side. You don't have that on the U.S. side. You don't have a real serious understanding of what Iran's interests are, what their needs are, how to work with Iran in the framework of international law. The U.S. makes demands for concessions that have no basis in international law. So until there can be a real change on the U.S. side to work with other countries, especially Iran, within the framework of international law, I'm afraid any negotiations aren't going to get far.
I think that particularly for President Obama, it's been two things. One is a sense that he doesn't really appreciate that at this point the United States needs an improvement in relations with Iran, at least as much as Iran can benefit from an improvement in relations with America. But that gets to the second big flaw. Is Obama really prepared to accept the Islamic Republic as an enduring and legitimate political entity representing legitimate national interests? If he is, then the possibilities for improvement in relations are enormous. But if he's not prepared to do this, whatever nice meeting he might have with Rouhani next week in New York, whatever other nice exchanges there might be, that's not really going to be substantive.
Well, we will certainly be watching very closely next week in New York. Thank you so much for your analysis. Like I said, in the spotlight next week, very much so, Iran and the U.S. People, experts will be watching very closely to see if possibly a step towards diplomatic relations is possible. Reporting from Washington, Anissa Nawad, RT.